Mm-hmm. In this case, the official report states that his place of death was Empire Boulevard and Albany Avenue, Auto. So here, this is what the chief medical examiner is saying. Mm-hmm. Now, that's what's going to go in the report. That's the official report. Whatever else came along was one of the things that we were really interested in seeing was the police report from the scene.
Right.
Which is nowhere to be found. Because that could give us information as to whether or not we think the body had been moved or that it did take place there. For instance, there are questions of, we know there was a through-and-through shot through his head. Where'd the bullet go? Is there a tear in the roof? Because I noticed that was a fabric roof, so it was a convertible. Was there a tear in it? Was the window down when he was shot? Is there a hole in the window glass? Or was the window open? Did it just go out the window?
Because we only see the picture of the detectives looking through the window.
Right,
yeah.
right, and we don't know if they rolled it down and looked in, if they
or
opened the
front
door,
windshield.
or did it go through the front windshield.
Or did nothing shatter?
Yeah, exactly.
We can see from that picture that nothing shattered, and we certainly can't see any...
Sort of, that's what I'm saying.
We can't see any blood on the windshield, so if they shot him at close range, or on contact, wouldn't there be blood on the windshield?
One of my points that I was going to come to is that I don't see any blood spatter evidence that indicates that he was shot in the car.
But it's really...
From what's in there, what makes you think either he was killed in the car or he wasn't killed in the car? Or was or wasn't killed in the position that he's in this photograph?
It's really difficult to make a final determination of that kind without
more information.
Mm-hmm. My gut feeling, and that's all I can say is it's a gut feeling, is that he was shot somewhere else and put in the car and parked there. A couple reasons. That's his car. Why isn't he in the driver's seat?
Now, you said he had a driver who was not with him that night.
He sent him home.
So he was driving himself.
He was driving his own vehicle. Why was he in the passenger seat of the car?
And where's his glasses when we know he was blind as a bat?
So my suggestion is that he was killed elsewhere, put in the car, driven there, and the guy walked away. But that's the strongest reasoning I have for that. And again,
it's all that's part of it circumstantial.
Exactly. And again, we differ with some minor opinions as to the blood on his clothing and how it's pooled and so forth, but not enough to make any huge difference, because I think there would be more evidence in the car, which they don't describe at all, of him being killed in the car. I think there would have been more evidence here of blood and so forth, but again, if he was shot and then immediately put in the car and driven, there would still be blood pooling and so on and so forth on the seat of his pants and so on, but because gravity will do that. Doesn't need a pumping heart to drain out a hole.
The reason being is the angle would prohibit it from being a distance.
Even if he's sitting with his head straight up like this, there's no way to get a 45-degree angle unless they're up close. She can't stand back there because it would have been a lower angle.
Right.
She has to be up close. And in this case, even though there's no stippling, which I find odd that he didn't mention, he may be using the contusion collar instead of stippling as his way of saying it was up close.
The verbiage may be different.
And that's what I was going to get to. It's odd that he's not talking about it because it's a big deal. But on the other hand, it may not have been a big deal then so much as they're saying the contusion from the barrel. That's the contusion collar, pressing up against his neck, causing a bruise.
It's not from the physical pressure of the barrel against the skin. It's the gases and projectile coming out of the barrel and entering the body. Causing the bruising.
But again, he had to have been alive for a bit, seconds.
For the blood to be pumping there to make a bruise or a contusion.
Yes. Well, for the body to start, the histamines and everything to start working to try and heal itself. That's why I believe it was close.
And the second one close as well?
Again, the second one's close because they also talk about this. The second wound is irregular in outline, but is surrounded by a contusion collar. Deeper portions of the wound are smudged. That tells me for sure that the second one was right
up against the wound.
Because the smudging would be caused by gas pressure and...
What's smudged? The gunpowder?
Not a clear wound, not a clear edge. It's smudged, it's softened, it's pushed.
Oh, okay.
It's smeared, it's smudged out.
So as the bullet hits the skin,
The gas pressure went first.
The gas pressure and the nose of the gun might even kind of go into the wound to make it softer.
It wouldn't go into the wound.
No, but
it
the
would
gas
press
would.
against it, but the gas would enter the skull in this particular
Press
case.
things out. So that's that. And again, the second wound is at a 30-degree angle, meaning his head had to be probably tipped down in order for that to happen.
Because it was hit by the first bullet.
More than like, well, he was unconscious. I mean, to a degree. What level of consciousness he had, who knows?
So he might have been sitting in a chair.
Could have been sitting in a chair when he was shot. Could have been on his knees if somebody was behind him.
So that's my big question. So that angle that you're saying is so weird. So if he's on his knees with his hands behind his back, let's say he's down like this, or actually the psychic saw him with his head against the side of the police car.
That's entirely possible. That could have put him at a 45 degree.
On the driver's side, passenger side, or do we know?
Outside of the car,
Just
on the
outside.
ground.
I guess my point.
Well, it would have had to have been on the passenger side.
With his hands tied behind his
Oh no,
back.
I mean, it would have had to have been on the driver's side.
So the question is that possible, what she saw?
Okay, so I have a diagram of a vehicle. So not the same kind of vehicle, obviously. This is a newer vehicle. So if he was outside the vehicle, the person that shot him, depending on how he was facing, so if he's on the passenger side of the vehicle facing the rear or driver's side, that would allow somebody standing outside the vehicle to shoot him at that angle. But he'd have to be.
You're saying
dead
if
at the
he's
waist.
in the car.
No.
if he's outside and on his
the car.
knees.
If he's out here somewhere and shooting at that angle, that's a possibility. Similarly, if he was on the driver's side of the vehicle and they could be standing outside on the driver's side, and he would be between the vehicle and the assailant who fired into the vehicle, that could happen that way.
Why does it matter where the assailant is standing?
Why would the cops want to...
Because say he was...
How does that change the trajectory of the bullet?
Because
Depending on the side of the car.
physiologically, the person who's shooting may not physically be able to get the gun into that
position.
angle to shoot from that position.
But what if
So
they're all
you-
outside the car?
Doesn't matter. It's still whoever's
Right.
holding the gun has to be able physically to put that gun in
So-
a position up against the guy's neck.
Which means if
To
there's
get
not
at
enough
that
space
kind of an
between
angle.
the car and him,
He couldn't get
he
there.
couldn't get there. Do you see what they're saying?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this narrows down the potential possible positions.
And yeah, it omits some, but it opens up what's a possibility depending on which side of the vehicle he was on.
Or what diagrams do you have you want to share?
Well, we have a vehicle diagram that shows it's a newer vehicle, but we were trying to figure out, seating positions where the assailant could have been if the shooting took place inside the vehicle. So if he was found in the front passenger seat of the vehicle, yes? Okay, except they're bench seats, not bucket seats like here. So if he's sitting here, the only place that it could have occurred, the assailant would have either been in the driver's seat or the assailant could have been in the rear seat, depending on which hand they used to inflict the gunshot wounds to the back of his head. And it makes more sense to me that it was the driver, but it very well could have been a passenger
Because of that weird angle.
because of the weird angle. And it just seemed more if it was, he could have been shot like this by somebody sitting next to him. But like Patrick said, it could have also been somebody sitting behind him, shooting him like this.
But it doesn't make sense that they'd move his body to the passenger side, then get in the back seat to shoot him.
No, but I mean, you may have had the assailant, say he got in the car.
Oh, someone else was driving
and
and he was in the back.
Yes.
But again, my belief is that he was shot somewhere else and moved. That he was positioned and staged.
And the hat speaks largely to that. If there was no exit wound, there was no blood, there was no any kind of forensic evidence showing a gunshot wound, exit from the skull while he was wearing the hat, then the hat had to have been placed on his head post-mortem.
And the blood being front and back meant the body was going back
Was
and forth.
repositioned.
Yeah.
Not going back and forth necessarily, but that it was repositioned.
But it was repositioned. It was moved.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that there had to be some ability for the heart to pump blood, for there to be blood in the places they were and pooled in the way they were.
If there was blood on the exterior of the shirt but not on the undershirt, that transfer came from a third party. The blood that was on the front of the shirt and or the coat had to have come from a different source, because it didn't seep down from the wound onto the chest, soak the undershirt, because the front of the undershirt did not have any blood on it. It wasn't stained or saturated with blood. The exterior of the shirt was.
Which is exactly my point.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
That's why I was saying I think
So that means almost like someone had to pick him up to carry him.
And then
they got the blood.
They probably did, facing
Yeah.
him.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
And that he was positioned that way, and that was the transfer of blood onto the front of the shirt without soaking the undershirt in the front.
That is so fascinating.
Additionally, tracks of the bullets are as follows. Bullet wound of entrance number 1 is upward and to the right, passing into the skull cavity through the occipital bone. The occipital bone is the major triangular portion. You have a back shot?
No, that was one I could not get.
Okay, this is the lower portion of the skull where it meets the spine. This portion here is the occipital bone. The two knots that you feel are occipital nodes, and there's a triangle that they form back here. All right, so this is telling you that the bullet came in from the rear through the occipital bone near the posterior portion of the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum is this hole in the base of the skull. So it was at such an angle that it went right past the back portion of that hole. The back portion. Now remember where I told you that the medulla oblongata is to the front and down. So it passed to the back of that and out through, transversing the cerebellum, which is the brain, and right cerebral hemispheres, this half of your brain, and making exit through the exit wound described on the right side of the skull. Angle is at 45 degrees. That's the wound number 1. So again,
that's the bullet that comes out.
That's the bullet that came out, and it came out here. So if he had been wearing his hat, there would be a hole, or his hat would have been off. It would have had bloody material,
hair, skull fragments, bone, and the gray matter.
which is also my point. That's why you don't see anything in the car.
So if there's no biological debris inside the vehicle, there's no spatter blood, no hair, no bone, no gray matter inside the interior of the vehicle,
Nor is there any in his hat.
Yeah, then
He was shot without his hat elsewhere.
that was not the original crime scene where he was murdered. That was
Right.
where they staged the body.
Number 2 takes a course to the right and upward. The angle being 30 degrees, which is a lesser angle than the first one, meaning his head was probably further down. Again, in an unconscious position. Passing into the skull cavity just posterior to the distal portion of the petrous bone. Let me see if I can find a picture of the petrous for you and show you where that is.
While he's doing that, I have a thought. And that is, if somebody manipulated the body and placed the hands, he's in a seated position, even if he's slumped forward, he's in a seated position, and they placed his hands folded approximately in the front of his lap, they turned his pockets inside out, somebody manipulated the body. You already know that. So it is likely that somebody placed him into that position, took his hands and placed them here, and then dealt with his pockets to show the sign of, a snitch or what have you. That would lend a lot of credence to the fact that the body was staged in that location after death.